Hi, hi everyone. My name is Quentin from ServiceNow, and in this short video, I want to show you how you can use any ServiceNow IntegrationHub spokes or spokes you have built yourself or spoke action. If you want to use Boomi Cloud API Management to track the usage of those API and add more control, add a kind of an abstraction layer for the authentication piece. You know that we have a partnership with Boomi, and when you are licensed for a new automation engine product, you get access to Boomi as well. So I want to answer some of the question on how would you reconfigure the spoke to use Boomi to track the usage and route the API traffic via Boomi. So here I'm just playing with a spoke that I've created that is on my ServiceNow instance, and it's pointing directly to my API endpoint. It's a payment gateway API. I'm just gonna show you how that API works. Taking a credit card amount, some description, and I click run test. I just want to show you before and after and what you would need to modify if you want to redirect the traffic. That's those outbound requests from the spokes to Boomi. So here you can see it doesn't go via Boomi, but it says payment successfully with some transaction. That's just a basic response for my API endpoint. So now let's say instead of going straight from ServiceNow to all of my different endpoints, let's say I want to centralize to Boomi Cloud API Management so I can add more governance and control and also reporting on all those API calls made from ServiceNow to many different endpoints. Well, there's a lot of value of using Boomi Cloud API Management instead of going straight from the spokes to your endpoints. So from a ServiceNow perspective, there's not much to reconfigure. As you know, ServiceNow Spoke leverage the credential and connection alias. So here I can modify my connection alias to point to Boomi, and that's what I'm going to show you here. As you can see here, I'm looking at my record for that particular spoke, and I created two connections. The first one, called Prod Payment Gateway, is pointing directly to my API endpoint. And the second connection record is pointing to my Boomi API. It's called Mashery, but it's in Boomi. So now if I put that endpoint, my API endpoint to value to false, my connection here, and put true, my spokes now is gonna use the same API call, but use that endpoint. And that endpoint is the one available to me as a customer of Boomi. So it's a URL of my Boomi endpoint, and I've configured it. Obviously, I'll show you the configuration to accept and redirect the call to my actual endpoint. So now that I've modified the value here, if I go back to my spoke and refresh the page, you should see that it's pointing to the Boomi endpoint instead of my endpoint. So you can see it's going to the Boomi URL. I don't change any of the input output and parsing techniques and things like that, because I really want to show you that if you're going to be using Boomi Cloud API Management from ServiceNow perspective, you just change that connection URL. Now I can test it, and we should expect the same result. I'm going to just put whatever value. I just want to show you that we get a response from that API. It's just the API query is just getting routed via Boomi, so you can track the API calls directly in Boomi. So here you can see I get the request from my API endpoint. It's just I'm interacting from ServiceNow to Boomi, and I can centralize all those API calls via Boomi. So that's you will see in two clicks on the ServiceNow side. It's pretty straightforward. And then in Boomi as well, I went to so I'm going to show you the Boomi Cloud API Management. In order to show you this, I went to design an API, and then I created a new API definition that corresponds to my actual API endpoint. And so I went there and I declared a new endpoint called process payment. Then I went to traffic routing. This is where you route the traffic from my Boomi endpoint to the real endpoint. And usually any Spoke that you have from ServiceNow, let's say Microsoft Teams, the Spoke will go to the Microsoft Azure endpoint. Well, so here it's another third-party endpoint that I'm using. It's a payment gateway system. So here it's my Boomi. This is provided by Boomi. By adding a value after the slash here, I'm just creating a new API path to access that particular API method. And this is my actual endpoint. I could have a different name. I just decided to make the name match. So when I'm making calls now from my API Spoke to that URL, it's going to be redirected to the actual endpoint. Right? That's basically how you manage the redirection. There's all kind of things you could do. I'm not going to cover this in this video, but you could do a pass-through of the API key for the authentication, or have developers or your users get their own keys from Boomi directly. So there's many different options. But the whole point of doing this is to centralize the API call via Boomi and be able to use the reporting, which I'm not going to have so much reporting here because I just configured the Boomi platform here. But eventually you will be able to track all the API call made for certain spokes or certain users directly within Boomi, and add an additional layer of security if you needed to do that. So that was just a quick overview of that one particular use case, and I will show you different use cases when your developers need to go through Boomi to query ServiceNow, right? But this one was to go from ServiceNow to external system, but redirecting the traffic through via Boomi. So that was an example that it will be the same principles for any Spoke that you may use from ServiceNow, just changing that connection record. Thank you.